Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
Recognize that we have to come together to fulfill the first responsibility of a democracy, and to keep each other safe. And that's what the American people are looking for when it comes to reducing violent crime and gun violence.
President Biden stepping up the fight against gun violence. So how does the White House plan to attack the nationwide surge in violent crime? The latest sign that America's longest war is almost over, the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan handing over control today to Central Command. And over in Tokyo, Olympic athletes under some strict COVID lockdowns. So is that making it hard to keep their head in the games?
And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's very hard being out here. It's very hard staying focused because we are quarantining.
We start today with the president's pitch to curb gun violence. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece here with me now. So Shannon, who was at today's meeting? What's the president's plan here? Fill us in on all the juicy details.
Well, he met with a number of local law enforcement leaders, elected officials, as well as some community leaders. Among those, I will note, is the newly minted Democratic mayoral nominee for the city of New York, Eric Adams, who was also among the group. And the message that the White House was trying to convey here is that the president is trying to take some actions, not just to address the issue of gun violence in the long term, but also in the short term, and listen to some of the things that these local officials are calling for. Among the things we just heard from officials suggesting were increased ATF enforcement to get illegal guns off the street now, a new strike force that's being discussed with the Department of Justice to try and go after criminals. Here's a little bit more of what the president had to say before the meeting began.
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. We know there are some things that work, and the first of those that works is stemming the flow of firearms used to commit violent crimes. It includes cracking down on holding rogue gun dealers accountable for violating the federal law.
And the president is also pushing for some of this $350 billion that went to state and local governments in the COVID relief bill to be used for police hiring.
Because the president is polling pretty poorly on violent crime. Just 38% of people approve of how he's handling it. 48% disapprove. That's according to an ABC News Washington poll out this month. The White House wants to change that. They want to paint the president as pro-police, tough around crime. You mentioned they're pushing the $350 billion in state and local funding under his COVID aid law to keep police employed. What else are they doing? How else are they trying to push back against this sort of Republican attack on where they stand when it comes to supporting the police?
Right. And Republicans tell us that they certainly plan in 2022 to use this wave of violent crime against the president and against Democrats. Whether or not that will be successful, we'll see. They tried it in 2020 and it didn't necessarily work for them, but they will make an effort at that again. One of the messages we have heard coming from the White House increasingly is trying to flip the table, flip the script on Republicans and argue that Republicans are the ones who want to defund the police because they voted against that $350 billion in COVID relief money for state governments, and also going back and citing other votes by Republicans to cut police funding through a separate federal program. So the White House is certainly very aware of the need to message on this, that what is going to resonate best with voters is painting the president as someone who is pro-law enforcement and pro-police and not an advocate of this defund the police movement. And that's a message we're hearing increasingly come from the administration.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece, just outside the White House. Thank you so much. There's a new general leading our troops in Afghanistan today. But as the U.S. withdraws, the Taliban's regaining control fast, creating some new terror concerns. Here's NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel.
Another milestone in the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan today. The commanding general, General Scott Miller, ended his long tour of duty. But there are questions what the United States is leaving behind as the Taliban makes advances. Could this country once again become a safe haven for international terrorists? As the U.S. military winds down operations, the top American general handing over to a new leader with a far more hands-off mission. The Taliban are closing in on Kabul. As U.S.-trained Afghan military forces put up half-hearted resistance or surrender outright. So is the United States heading right back to where it started? The U.S. invaded Afghanistan nearly 20 years ago because the Taliban were in power. And they hosted Osama bin Laden, whose group Al-Qaeda was responsible for 9/11. Now, one military unit is still fighting hard to prevent future bin Ladens from taking hold: the elite Afghan commandos. I recently saw them in action, attacking a Taliban safe house.
What about foreign fighters, extremists, terrorists? We understand that they are starting to come back in once again.
These people who are coming to create troubles and problems for the world, for the future, as they did in 9/11.
Even worse than 9/11, I'm telling you.
Fawzia Kufi is a member of parliament and a negotiator with the Taliban. Extremists tried to assassinate her twice.
You have been in war, and in war people don't distribute sweets. They kill each other. So do you think those who actually have been killed, they will not go for revenge and hostilities? They will.
I put that question to Mutassim Agha, a former Taliban leader who knew bin Laden.
Will Afghanistan once again become a base for international terrorist attacks?
The Taliban signed a peace deal with the United States, and a main point is that the Taliban will not allow any terrorist groups to operate in Afghanistan, he says, adding there will be more guarantees once the Taliban are in power. The former Taliban commander, who still maintains close ties to the group, said once the Taliban take over, it will be up to the group to keep ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other extremists, as he called them, terrorists, out of the country. And he wants the United States militarily to help the Taliban do it.
Texas Democrats getting out of Dodge today, or at least Austin. They're flying to D.C. to block 2 GOP-backed voting restrictions in their state, and they could get arrested for leaving town during a special legislative session. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Austin, Texas. Priscilla, the vote on those 2 bills coming pretty fast, so Democrats are making a break for it again. Our own Jane Tim reporting. What's going on today?
Yes, a very busy day on the ground here in Austin. We know that some of those lawmakers have already left town on commercial flights. The rest are supposed to be getting out on 2 jets, 30-passenger jets. Later on today, we're hearing reports that one of those may already be in the air. So we're trying to track down what exactly the status of those lawmakers is at this moment. But of course, all of this comes after those public hearings that were held this weekend, where hundreds of people showed up to voice their opposition to these bills, and yet and still Republicans passed that GOP-backed bill, or those GOP-backed bills out of committee. It was a vote along party lines. I spoke to one Texas lawmaker on her way to the airport, Democratic lawmaker, and here's what she had to say about that and what prompted the decision to leave town.
Before we started, I basically said we should have the hearings because the people need to be heard. And let's see how they respond in those hearings. If at least one Republican would have acted like they cared, then I think that, potentially we wouldn't be in this situation because, okay, well, there's some fodder there. There's something that we can work with. But once they voted those bills out, I think everybody decided at that point, we've really got to decide if it's going to be now or never.
And I just got a text message from someone with direct knowledge saying that those lawmakers are now off the ground on their way to D.C. Again, still digging in on that, but that appears that it might be the case at this moment. We're also now getting Republican reaction with the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, sending out a statement just a little while ago saying the Texas House will use every available resource under the Texas Constitution and the unanimously passed House rules to secure a quorum. And so that means that he could very well attempt to send law enforcement here in Texas after those folks. It's unclear what jurisdiction they would have with those lawmakers no longer in Texas. But of course, those lawmakers would have to remain in D.C. for the next 3 weeks until this special session ends. They have signaled that they are prepared to do that, staying away from their family members and loved ones for that period of time. But it also means that Governor Greg Abbott could call another special session after they come back. And we might see this play out again in just a few weeks. Allison?
So, Priscilla, just remind our viewers what's at stake here. What's in these Republican-backed voting bills?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're seeing in these new bills are the same provisions that Democrats walked out on in May. So it includes things like a ban on overnight and drive-through voting, which was very popular in Houston, Texas. We know that it would also increase penalties for election officials, criminal penalties. So, for example, it would be a state felony for an election official to send an unsolicited vote-by-mail ballot application to a voter. Meanwhile, it's going to create more protections for partisan poll watchers, something that has Democrats very concerned that that might lead to some sort of voter intimidation or issues at polling places. And so those are some of the main provisions that Democrats are pushing back against, rallying against in this moment and trying to prevent from coming to pass.
Priscilla, Democrats also have a counter bill. It's called the Barbara Jordan Voter Protections Act, named for the first African-American elected to the Texas Senate, also the first black woman elected to the U.S. House. What is in that bill?
Yeah, so Democrats say that this would expand voting access for people, that it would extend the early voting period, that it would create more opportunities for people to vote by mail, essentially eliminating what they call, quote, unnecessary barriers to the ballot. But of course, Democrats do not control neither the House nor the chamber in the Texas legislature. So they don't expect that they're going to get a hearing on this bill. But Democratic senators tell me this is their way of sort of drawing a line in the sand and making it clear where they stand on these issues. They would like to see more people voting, more access to voting, and less restrictions that would prevent eligible voters from casting those ballots. Allison?
Priscilla, Hervis Rogers making some news in the last week. He's the 62-year-old who waited over 6 hours. He was the last person to vote on Super Tuesday at Texas Southern University. He was arrested last Wednesday on voter fraud, released on bail this weekend. Here's what he said back in 2020.
I mean, I wouldn't feel right if I didn't vote. I mean, I feel like I voice my opinion, but it don't feel right if I don't vote. So I said, well, I'm going to take a stand and vote. It might make a difference.
So, Priscilla, tell us about his arrest. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this came the day before the Texas special session began. He was arrested because he was on parole at the time that he voted, which means that it was illegal for him to cast that ballot. Now, Rogers says that he was not aware that he was ineligible at the time whenever he waited in those long lines in order to do that. And what's more is that after he was arrested, his bail was set at $100,000. And so folks started a GoFundMe. They spent several days raising that money. And on Saturday, the same day that these public hearings were taking place at the State House, he was able to make bail and be released from prison. But he now faces up to 25 years to life on each count, and he's facing 2 felony accounts for voting while he was on parole. Allison?
All right, Priscilla, thank you so much. What a day there in Austin. I know you have plenty of updates for us throughout the week. Thanks for your reporting.
You bet.
Former President Trump headlining CPAC in Dallas over the weekend. 70% of CPAC voters saying in a straw poll they'd back the former president in 2024, while he continued to hit the crowd with election fraud claims and conspiracy theories from 2020.
The radical left Democrat, the entire system was rigged. Partisan persecution. It's persecution. The fake news media, cheating, Silicon Valley tyrant, left-wing cancel culture, critical race theorists.
NBC News political correspondent Ali Vitale has more of the highlights from the weekend.
Hey, Allison, the former president back in front of a friendly crowd and continuing to revive those conspiracy theories and lies that he has continued to say from his own rallies to conservative gatherings such as this one. CPAC typically looked at by Republicans as a way to see where the grassroots and the heart of the party is, what their priorities are. And in the CPAC straw poll this year, those issues are pretty evident, and they mirror exactly what the former president and his allies have been talking about since he lost the election in November, all the way through now as he gets back out on the rally circuit ahead of the midterm elections. Look at the straw poll. You can see right there the top three issues are things like voting integrity, constitutional rights, and of course immigration and the border. All three of those things focal points for the former president. But I really want to narrow in on that first one, the idea that there wasn't an election that had integrity and security in 2020. That's not true, but it's not stopping Republicans at this conference, including Trump, but also many other lawmakers and conservative pundits who spoke here, from talking about it like it happened. The outgrowth of that is that you now have this sort of alternate reality happening among some conservatives who really do believe not just that the 2020 election was stolen from them, which again is false, but that there is a need for stricter voting laws and voting restrictions that could make it harder for some people to vote across the country. And also it's this rewriting of history around the January 6th insurrection. That is bolstered, of course, by Trump going on certain platforms like Fox that are favorable to him and that continue to reinforce the lies that he tells. I think that's why it's so incumbent on those of us who can see the facts of this situation to call them out. But it is really creating this idea that there are no common facts around what happened on January 6th. Of course, that's important when you consider the fact that in Congress, they're going to begin to try to build the foundation of exactly what happened here in that select committee. So all of that coming as the former president takes a much more public posture. But there's also the politics of this moment here. Right now, we're in the very, very early stages of a Republican shadow primary for the 2024 presidential election. You see in this straw poll the balancing act that Republicans are going to have to do over the next few years. CPAC said that they did one poll that assumed Trump ran in 2024. They did another poll that assumed he didn't. They said just because they don't know what's going to happen. That's exactly the balancing act that Republicans in Washington have been trying to figure out as it comes to the midterms and retaking the majorities in the House and Senate. But it's also going to be the balancing act for people that you see on this straw poll list, like Ron DeSantis, who's a likely heir apparent to the Trump base, Mike Pompeo, Trump's former Secretary of State, certainly his former vice president, Mike Pence, all of them going to have to walk that tightrope between wanting to potentially be president themselves, but not wanting to seem too eager to take the former president's spotlight, at least until he gives them the okay.
Let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the Monday headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Allison. Today we're going to start in Haiti. Police there arresting a third suspect who has U.S. ties in President Jovenel Moise's assassination, according to national police. Now, according to national police, Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to Haiti in June with hired security guards wanting to take the presidency. Now, they allege the guards were originally meant to protect Sanon, but at some point the mission changed. And China says it, quote, drove away a U.S. warship that illegally entered Chinese waters near the Parcel Islands. However, a 2016 international court ruling held Beijing has no claim over the South China Sea. The U.S. Navy says it asserted navigational rights and freedoms consistent with international law. China is urging the U.S. to, quote, immediately stop such provocative actions. And on to some coronavirus news internationally. The UK confirming COVID lockdown measures in England will be completely lifted by July 19th. That's despite an ongoing surge of the Delta variant in the country. The health minister saying, quote, we firmly believe that this is the right time to get our nation closer to normal life. And a recent Mexican mayoral candidate is under arrest, also accused of trying to sell millions in fake art. Angel Pereda is in custody in New York following wire fraud charges, and he allegedly tried to sell 4 phony pieces for millions of dollars to different auction houses. Now, the works are copies of modern art icons Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. They include 2 individual paintings, 1 collaborative painting, and a vase. And now to the latest in space travel. So Virgin Galactic may have soared into space, but its stock shares are actually plummeting today. This after the company filed to sell up to $500 million in common stock. Trading even stopped briefly due to the volatility. Despite the 14% single-day drop, the stock is up more than 80% this year due to the company's advances in space travel. Allison, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Simone, thank you.
The number of confirmed deaths is now 94. 83 of these victims have been identified and 80 next of kin notified. Please join me in continuing to pray for those we have lost, the families who are grieving, and those who are still waiting.
The devastation growing by the day in Surfside, Florida. 94 people now dead. Recovery teams still looking for 22 others. NBC News reporter Vaughn Hilliard has more from Surfside.
Good afternoon, Allison. The number of confirmed deceased individuals here in Surfside, Florida is now up to 94. The other significant number is that the number of potential unaccounted for individuals is down to 22, suggesting that this recovery process is getting closer to its end. This was such a significant week ever since the demolition of that existing structure that did not collapse in that initial collapse. And what you're looking at here as part of this recovery effort is progress to the point that through most of that building that did collapse, essentially the rubble has been cleared almost down to the garage level, which was beneath that first level. The Surfside mayor indicating that over these last days they made significant progress in moving out this rubble to a secure location in Miami where they're able to continue to try to gain evidence as to exactly what brought down that structure, but also work through items and treasures that belong to families that passed away and try to be able to return them to their loved ones that are still around. The other part of the development is here, the tough weather that struck Surfside here today, pausing the rescue teams over the course of hours after thunder, lightning, significant rain and wind struck down here, pausing those very search efforts. Also, Israeli forces that were key in their recovery efforts, their assistance here of Florida task forces, they actually went home on Sunday and were given a warm send-off by Miami-Dade County Mayor, who gave the commander, honorary keys to the county for their efforts here coming from overseas to assist in this rescue effort. But this has been tough because every day we have seen an uptick in number of confirmed individuals that have been deceased. Just one of those individuals over the weekend was Edgar Gonzalez, a father of two daughters. One of those daughters, 16 years old, still in the hospital alongside of her mother. They were on the 9th floor in a unit, and they fell onto the 5th floor. They are still with us in the hospital, holding on through this recovery process. But their father, Edgar Gonzalez, losing his life. Just one of the stories here in Surfside as folks continue to reckon with this recovery effort that so many have lost their lives to.
Pfizer briefing U.S. health officials today about the need for a booster shot with the Delta variant taking hold all across the country. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has more.
Warning signs are flashing for the more transmissible Delta variant, which makes up more than half the country's new COVID infections, permeating pockets already vulnerable from low vaccination rates.
This is the worst strain of the virus we have seen throughout the whole pandemic, by far. It is way, way, way more contagious.
Pfizer will meet with the nation's top health officials to discuss the need for a possible third booster shot. So far, the CDC says there's no evidence that Americans should get one after 6 to 12 months. At the moment, those declining to get their first or second shots have catalyzed an alarming uptick in trends. New infections have risen 16% week over week, with hospitalizations jumping 8.6%, though deaths are still declining by 25%. Younger adults are increasingly bearing the brunt of the latest wave.
We're seeing disturbingly young people in the hospital. We're seeing pregnant women in the hospital who we could have protected not only themselves, but also their unborn baby.
In South Carolina, the governor has asked the health department there not to go door to door to increase vaccination rates, while at the CPAC conference in Dallas over the weekend, cheers.
And it isn't happening, right? There's a...
When a speaker pointed out the lagging vaccine numbers, something Dr. Fauci called horrifying.
Is it possible that people are a little scared, a little nervous, and the more facts they hear, they don't hear evidence. What they hear is, you're a dummy for not getting this.
You know, you have a point there, and that's the reason, John, where what's going on right now is getting trusted messages in the community to outreach to people.
In 14 states, less than 40% of the population is fully vaccinated, with Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas ranking lowest. It all comes as the CDC says schools should prioritize in-person learning, giving the green light to fully vaccinated students and teachers to ditch their masks. Though California will still require face coverings for everyone.
I don't want to wear my mask anymore, but I'm used to it.
Death Valley, California hitting 130 degrees over the weekend, just a few degrees shy of the world record. That heat only adding fuel to the wildfires burning in the West. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas is sweating it out for us in Los Angeles. Guad, millions of people under heat warnings across the West. Tell us more about what's going on out there.
Allison, temperatures are still hot in the West. As you mentioned, 130 degrees in the Death Valley. Now, this is part of the desert, and people are used to high temperatures, but this is hotter than normal. This entire area just south of there, in the city's area, in the Palm Springs area, temperatures getting up to 120 degrees. This is an area that is popular for tourism. Lots of tourists that usually come in, and they try to spend some time in the summer, but it was just too much over the weekend. In fact, we spoke to some honeymooners that said the temperatures were just torture.
It's the hottest place on earth. Like, this is hot. It's never been hotter. It feels like we're in an oven. Yeah. Like, the air feels hot. Yeah. It's so hot.
And of course, this now being the result of the heat dome. This is the same weather that affected the Pacific Northwest at the end of June. We know that now there's more than 100 deaths reported in Oregon, more than 70 in Washington. All of those blamed on the heat. Now affecting parts of California. And we have to remember that the entire West is also experiencing a drought. So high weather, hot conditions, and you have a drought, all of this making things much more difficult in the West.
Yeah, we got to talk about the wildfires, too. The heat, the dry conditions, certainly not helping there. What are firefighters doing to try to control and contain them, Guad?
Right. So now we have wildfires, especially in Oregon. We have the Boot Lake fire. Over 150,000 acres burned. Some of the firefighters fighting that have had to retreat. Meanwhile, they're doing what they can. And of course, the authorities, their fire authorities, saying this is as bad as it can get. They expect the summer to be even worse. Just south of that in Northern California, we have the Beckworth fire, which is 80,000 acres burned. It's already jumped into Nevada. It's already burned at least 20 homes, with some people having to evacuate. So these are just the two largest fires that are currently burning in the West as we go through the middle of July, which is not really supposed to be the fire season out here. We're still going to enter the months where we expect the fires to continue in the entire area in the West. And meanwhile, we have other wildfires in California. So authorities here are preparing for the worst. Meanwhile, as I said earlier, we have the drought, 85% of California under extreme drought conditions. So all of these things will definitely be having its effect on Californians and others in the West, Allison.
And Guad, it's no surprise the heat wave's putting a lot of pressure on the power grid. What's the latest there?
Right. So the fire in Oregon, the Boot Lake fire, has affected some power lines that go from Oregon into California. Some of the power that California uses comes through from the grid. So this power will no longer come into California, which means we have less power. So now there's a flex alert for the entire state throughout the day. So they're asking Californians to try to not use the same amount of power they normally would today, at least to save power until the evening to 9 p.m. These are the peak hours. Meanwhile, the governor signed an executive order to have more power used in the state of California. And this is something that we're used to experiencing in California, these flex alerts. People just aren't used to having them so early in the summer. So we're going to get through a hot, rough day with these fires burning, a flex alert, with authorities hoping for the best in the West.
Well, we are hoping for it as well. Guad, thank you so much. It is time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Earnings season kicking off this week with some big names. Plus, we have important inflation data, and we'll hear from the Fed chair before Friday. A lot happening this week, so let's check in with CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon. Rahel, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, some of the big banks reporting this week. Who are the other big names releasing their second quarter earnings? And what key things should the average American be watching for in these reports? We could learn a lot about what's going on in our country from these companies, their numbers and their outlook. So what should everyone be keeping an eye on?
I think so, too. Hi, Allison. Yes, so this week, it's a busy week. We get reports from 23 S&P 500 companies and 3 Dow components. So in addition to the big banks, which you mentioned, Allison, we will also hear from PepsiCo. They report tomorrow, along with food maker ConAgra. Wednesday, we hear from Delta Airlines, and Dow component United Health is on Thursday. So I'm not sure how often what the average American cares about also aligns with what investors care about, but this might be the perfect match. So when it comes to some of the consumer names, investors are going to be watching and looking to see how inflation is eating into bottom lines. And then for a typical consumer, that's also an indication perhaps of whether prices will continue to go up. So, Allison, the reasons may differ, but I think there's some alignment there. There's some synergy there.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing some synergy. And you said the magic word that we'll be talking about throughout this week, inflation. We have two key pieces, of data coming out, the consumer price index and the producer price index. Now, for our viewers who don't know what those are, you just need to know that one word here, inflation. What do these indexes tell us about what we pay at the grocery store or the gas station, for example?
Right. So Tuesday, the June Consumer Price Index report comes out. So that's a measure of the change in prices paid by urban consumers from a basket of set items, things like milk, eggs, cereal, gas, even bedroom furniture. And then Wednesday, we'll get Producer Price Index, which is essentially the cost of producing goods. That measures the change in the cost of selling items, both of which are very important reads on inflation, but just perhaps from different vantage points. We know that inflation and the rising costs have already led to a lot of concern in the market. The Federal Reserve reiterating that it believes that inflation will be transitory and will not have long-lasting impacts.
A lot of people worried about that. We just keep saying everything is more expensive this summer, or so it seems. Yeah. All right, Fed Chair Jerome Powell's talking to Congress on Wednesday and Thursday about the state of our economy. I love listening to Jay Powell, but I know I might be in the minority. For our viewers who think this will be a snooze fest, why should they pay attention here?
Well, at risk of sounding like a broken record, the hot topic here will be inflation. This is his semi-annual testimony to yes, it's going to be inflation again. This is his semi-annual testimony to Congress. He's going to address the House Financial Services Committee on Wednesday and the Senate Banking Committee on Thursday. Lawmakers are going to seek insights on whether the economy can strengthen in the second half of the year or if inflation and the Delta variant also could pose significant hurdles in the coming months. He's also spent a lot of time every time he speaking about the employment picture. So that's also another reason for people to watch. It becomes less of a snooze fest. Your words, not mine. But when he talks about things like the economy and the employment market, everybody, can benefit from that.
Yeah, if you think it's boring, pay attention here, because just everything we've talked about today, it's all about how much we're paying. Are things more expensive? If that doesn't matter to you, I mean, come on, we're talking about your wallet this week, so listen up. Rahel, thanks for being with us. We always love seeing you on Mondays.
Of course. Likewise.
With the help of everyone here today, we will defeat the radical left, the socialist Marxists, and the critical race theorists. Whoever thought would be even using that term?
Critical race theory, the study of the impact of racism. It is becoming a flashpoint in American schools and a conservative point of attack. At least 9 states have banned teaching it in schools. That legislation doesn't explicitly mention textbooks, but education experts worry they're next. NBC News contributor Safia Sami Ali joins me now. Safia, parents in Naples, Florida told you critical race theory isn't even part of the curriculum in their schools, but it's already an issue at school board meetings. What's going on there in particular?
That's right. So in Collier County, Florida, where Naples sits, dozens of parents protested the approval of textbooks by publisher Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, saying that the publisher shared blog posts about teaching racial justice in the classroom and also put up a commitment to Black Lives Matter. The parents said that these actions amounted to endorsing the teaching of critical race theory in the classrooms and demanded the books be banned. Now, the school board there did eventually approve the books, saying that there was nothing related to critical race theory in the books. However, they did put a very firm stance out after that vote, saying that they do not support the teaching of any content that has to do with critical race theory.
A senior policy researcher at the nonprofit RAND Corporation talked to you about the specific concerns with textbooks here. What did she say?
So she was saying that even though the critical race theory legislation and bans that are sort of popping up everywhere don't explicitly mention textbooks, some of these restrictions could potentially spill over to textbooks, textbook review commissions specifically. Some of the people on these commissions could potentially dilute certain content that they interpret as falling under these bans. So now, and that's mostly to err on the side of caution. I mean, some of these commissions may feel that they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want their educators to get in trouble. They don't want to potentially expose the district to litigation. So they may start looking at textbooks within the lens of these bans and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be emphasizing this content, or maybe we shouldn't be, putting this content in, just to be an abundance of caution and not really violate any of the bans that are in place.
Mm-hmm. You wrote that school history textbooks, particularly in more conservative-leaning states, have long been criticized for sanitizing and even omitting the complete experiences of people of color. You go on to list some shocking examples in Texas and Louisiana. Could you tell us what they're teaching there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had several examples in the recent history where some of the things that were in textbooks have been sanitized. In 2015, a Texas mother called out the state education board for a textbook that described African-American slaves brought to the United States as, quote, immigrants and, quote, workers. In 2014, again in Texas, the State Board of Education was criticized for approving books that sort of downplayed the issue of slavery in the Civil War, and also failed to adequately address segregation in the Jim Crow era. Even more recently, a 2020 New York Times investigation found that 2016 editions of textbooks that were seemingly identical, but one in California and one in Texas, had hundreds of differences. The version in California discussed redlining and restrictive deeds post the Civil War, while the Texas version didn't discuss any kind of housing discrimination. The California version also discussed sort of the pushback for Black Americans having more rights post the Civil War, while in Texas, the reason for the pushback, Texas was saying, was because people opposed higher taxes, and that reforms cost higher taxes, and so people were more opposed to taxes and not giving rights to Black Americans. So there's been a lot of sanitization of textbooks just in our recent history.
Yeah, those comparisons and the differences are absolutely amazing. A really interesting story. Sophia, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
President Biden talking gun control today. And listen to this statistic. In 2021, at least 167 children were involved in accidental shootings. That means the child pulled the trigger, according to gun safety advocate Everytown. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett spoke with a mother whose life changed in an instant when her young son picked up a gun.
The way it was explained to me by the officers, they figured that it slipped in his hands and his fingers hit the trigger and the gun went off. And when it went off, it shot through the inner corner of Eli's right eye, exited behind his right ear, and embedded in the wall behind him.
When he was just a toddler, Eli Parker accidentally shot himself in the head with an unsecured gun.
I just was naive enough to think that anyone who my children would be around would be responsible adults.
Since 2002, when this happened, Eli's had many surgeries, wears a prosthetic eye, and he and his mom, Haley, still deal with PTSD.
A few inklings of what I would call a memory that I have are spotty at best. Ambulance ride, television, and the layout of the bedroom are about all I remember.
But the ability for children to access guns and cause unintentional injuries is a problem that still persists today.
Breaking news, a mother is in custody after an 8-year-old accidentally shot a 12-year-old last week.
Police say this was an accident, and both the suspect and victim are children.
These incidents from last week alone. An estimated 4.6 million American children live in homes with at least one gun that is loaded and unlocked. Everytown, a gun safety advocacy group, has been tracking unintentional shootings by children. Just this year, they've counted at least 167 of them, resulting in 64 deaths and 112 injuries nationally. They also found that between March and December of 2020, prime pandemic lockdown period, there was a 32% increase in unintentional shooting deaths by children, of themselves and others, compared to the same time period in 2019.
They had always assured me, we're not ever going to have anything down where they can touch it, and we keep it all locked up. And I mean, they had a gun safe, so I was foolish enough to trust them.
Haley isn't the only mom in the dark. Research from Northeastern this spring found that 70% of parents believe their children can't access the guns they keep in their homes. But their kids say otherwise. More than 1/3 of teens say they could get a hold of a loaded gun kept in the home in less than 5 minutes.
A tear, this little bloody tear ran out of his eye, and he said, "Mommy, I'm so sorry." That was the first words he said to me when he came out of that coma. And I just broke down and I told him, I said, "You have nothing to be sorry about. This is not your fault. This is the irresponsible gun owner's fault."
We know from modeling that even a modest increase in safe storage in homes would significantly decrease injury and mortality to youth.
Gun safety advocates are pushing for child access prevention laws. This would allow prosecutors to bring charges against adults who unintentionally or carelessly allow children to have unsupervised access to guns. Their simple solution, requiring gun locks or gun safes in homes where underage children live. But some people push back.
I ran to my front door loading the gun as I ran. I could have shaved 90 seconds off if my firearm had been loaded and not locked behind a giant steel door.
Saying if their gun was locked away, they wouldn't be able to access it quickly enough in an emergency or for self-defense. Haley now works as an advocate for the Be Smart campaign with Everytown. She emphasizes that she always asks about the presence of guns in other people's homes. Right now, 30 states have a range of these laws in place, but only 17 states and Washington, D.C. put criminal liability on people who negligently store firearms. The potential for bipartisanship seen in the variety of the political ideology in states who have stricter laws. But in some cases, in states without these laws, the children can even be charged.
We don't think it was a premeditated, that their intent was to actually kill Mr. Smith. But, when you fire a firearm in the direction of another person in a reckless manner, then that is considered involuntary manslaughter.
The sheriff says under South Carolina law, a child younger than 10 can't be arrested. He says the children are with their parents as these court proceedings continue.
There has to be accountability somewhere, and I do not think that it should be placed on the child.
If they get access to someone else's weapon, the blame should fall on the person who owns it. That's how it is with homeowners insurance, car insurance, or any other thing that you would own if somebody else gets hurt on it.
Democrats on the Hill reintroduced a federal safe storage bill this past session, putting the spotlight on what advocates say needs to be a bipartisan effort when Congress returns.
Duct tape. Flight attendants are now using duct tape to deal with out-of-control passengers. It seems we have completely forgotten how to behave on airplanes. NBC News reporter Vaughn Hilliard shows us some of the chaos.
Unruly passengers shutting down airports and diverting planes. Flight attendants duct taping this woman to her seat on a flight to Charlotte this week. American Airlines saying she attempted to open the plane's boarding door and then physically assaulted, bit, and caused injury to a flight attendant. These passengers heading to Miami forced to put their hands on their heads for nearly an hour due to a security concern mid-flight. And thousands forced to evacuate Fort Lauderdale's airport. Authorities arrested this man. He claimed to have a bomb in his luggage during an argument with a ticket counter employee. Now, more than 3,200 reports of unruly riders this year. The number of FAA investigations? Already 3 times more than a normal year. The FAA releasing a zero-tolerance PSA.
Teacher, stop!
NTSA resuming self-defense classes for flight crews.
Drop males to the front of the aircraft to handle the problem passenger.
Packed planes and resistance to mask mandates, inflaming the stresses of air travel. United Airlines CEO hoping those mandates will end soon.
The current government order expires on September 13th, and fingers crossed, my guess is it will expire on September 13th.
Clearly, the masks are a spark point. But
It is not really the underlying cause. Any flight attendant who's out there working would say there's something much bigger going on here. And there is just a general aggression.
Yeah, we need to get legs pushed to the back, dude.
American and Southwest Airlines stopping alcohol service, and the FAA handing out massive fines from $7,500 to $52,000, a steep price to deter more chaos in the air.
Olympians arriving in Tokyo for the Games, and they are dealing with heavy restrictions and COVID lockdowns. NBC News senior national correspondent Tom Yamas is in Tokyo, where the athletes are feeling the pressure of being trapped in a bubble.
Tokyo now under a state of emergency, and Olympians feeling it the moment they land. From long waits and COVID testing at the airport to apps that track their every move. Travel is limited to the Olympic Village and event locations. No trips to outside restaurants or tourist sites are allowed. U.S. boxer Keyshawn Davis describing it this way.
And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's very hard being out here. It's very hard staying focused because we are quarantining and we can't go nowhere.
But with all the restrictions in place, Olympic athletes are not required to be vaccinated.
I didn't want to put anything in my body that I didn't know how I would potentially react to. As an athlete on the elite level.
50.80 from Michael. Team USA's Michael Andrew competing in 3 events, saying he's not vaccinated and doesn't plan on it in the near future.
All of us here have been through a very strict protocol.
Tokyo's new COVID restrictions, including no fans, have Serbian tennis star Novak Djokovic thinking twice about competing. Fresh off his victory at Wimbledon, Djokovic is now on track to be the first man to ever win a Golden Slam, a Grand Slam, plus a gold medal.
My plan was always to go to Olympic Games, but right now I'm a little bit divided. It's kind of 50-50 because of what I heard in the last couple of days.
Talented collection. For some events, the competition is already heating up. On the basketball court over the weekend, Team USA suffering a stunning loss to Nigeria in its first Olympic warm-up exhibition game.
They post up Durant and met up top by Achua. What a block!
Kevin Durant getting stuffed at the rim by Precious Achua, one of 7 NBA pros playing for Nigeria. The American team, though, also stacked with NBA stars, including Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, and Jason Tatum.
None of us had ever played with each other, so we're just trying to figure it out. We know we don't have 3 or 4 weeks, or whatever it may be, but I think this was good for us, and we're going to learn a lot from film, just regroup.
Italy's soccer team back home after winning the Euro 2020 title. The champs got a hero's welcome in Rome this afternoon. They beat England yesterday on penalty kicks. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter's in Rome with more of this celebration.
Hey, Allison, there ain't no party like an Italian victory celebration party. So in the square I am in right now, there was a huge party last night. You can actually see they are cleaning up tons of machinery, trying to return this beautiful square back to normal. But across the city, across the country today, that party is still going on. Take a look.
Overnight in Italy, pandemonium, celebrations spilling into the streets after the country's soccer team won the Euro Cup, beating England in a dramatic final match.
Italy just won, and the streets are going nuts.
Play towards the back post and scores for England.
In the first half, England started strong, scoring less than 2 minutes into the game, the fastest goal ever in a Euro final. England's home crowd couldn't get enough. But Italy tied it up in the second half.
Dangerously, and it's Leonardo Bonucci.
The match then tied after regulation, extra, and overtime, eventually coming down to nail-biting penalty kicks. Italy's goalkeeper stopping England's final shot to secure the victory.
And it does it! And Italy are champions of Europe!
From California to the Coliseum, Italy's fans across the world were overjoyed. Celebrations in the streets of San Diego, New York's Little Italy, filled with fans. But in England, devastation. The loss extending a 55-year national team drought in major tournaments.
I'm lost for words. Literally lost for words.
Prince George and his parents in the crowd cheering on their team, also sharing in England's heartache.
He's going to lift that Henri Delorme trophy high, and it means that Italy are champions of Europe.
But for Italy, it's redemption. The typically strong national team didn't even qualify for the last World Cup in 2018, but came back this year to prove they're a team of champions.
Now, of course, the other big story that we're covering in Rome is Pope Francis's health. And in his statement earlier today, he said he shared in the joy of that big win. And he said sports can teach us to keep going, keep fighting with hope and trust. Ain't that the truth?
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.